first and foremost, I want to introduce myself. So I'm Ollie. I'm community manager at a company called Stacker, and we'll be talking a bit about Stacker later on. But more generally, I'm a kind of no-code enthusiast, I guess. I kind of got really into it a couple of years ago as a kind of, I was kind of a failed coder in life, and I just found that these tools allowed me to actually build some of the software that I could imagine. And I built a couple of little SaaS products, and they never really went anywhere. But I just love what it empowers. So I'm always keen to talk to other people about what they do with no code. I'm going to ask you all to introduce yourselves in the chat as well. So I'm going to just copy and paste something that I have pre-prepared, but I think it's really important that we're able to connect with each other afterwards if we want to follow up. So I put a bit about myself, like what I work on and how you can follow up with me if you'd like to. Please do copy if you'd like to do that. And we also have the Q&A functionality enabled. So throughout this webinar, you can click on that and ask a question, and we can ask it. And I think because this is going to be quite a conversational webinar, we'd really like it if you ask the questions as we go. We're not going to have like a dedicated Q&A time at the end. I think it would be cool to kind of weave them into the conversation. So if there's a burning question that you have, do just ask it. You can ask it anonymously as well if you're worried if it's not a good question, but don't worry, all questions are good questions. Yeah, we'll just try and work them into the conversation. So please do introduce yourselves. And I would like to introduce Afonso, who I met, I think, via the Stacker Slack originally.
Yeah, I believe so. A good example of a fantastic community. And I can also see some familiar names in the attendees. Michael Spicer, who was part of a different community that I'm part of here in Australia. So it's nice to see those names popping up.
Ooh,
but yeah, to the community channel of Stacker. Yeah,
we can talk a lot about communities if you want, because that's my whole thing. And like I love both like my online no-code community that I connect with, but also I'm like deeply ingrained in the startup scene here in Scotland, and I love the kind of crossover between the two. But this isn't about me, this webinar. This is really more about you, Afonso. And thanks for joining today. And I guess it would be great to sort of maybe just, would you be up for just introducing yourself, like a bit about you, your history, just to kick things off? That would be great.
Yeah, no worries. I guess I'll start with the personal. I'm Portuguese, and I moved to Uruguay when I was a teenager, and then after living in Uruguay, I moved to Australia, where I became an environmental engineer. Had a couple of semi-successful businesses while still at uni, and a lot of failed ones. Fell in love with pitching and entrepreneurship and hackathons when I was just 19, and I realized you could win hard cash by going to these 2-day events and pitch crazy ideas. And that's where kind of the bug bit me. And I slowly progressed towards sustainability, towards seeing how we can empower everyone to access sustainability data. And I had an e-commerce business selling sustainable goods. And then I slowly moved more into software. And that's where the idea of NetNada came about, where I was seeing that people wanted more than just physical goods. They wanted advice, and businesses wanted advice. And I didn't want to go towards kind of consulting, and I wanted to democratize that access via technology, and at the beginning to low code.
Very awesome. We can come back to hackathons actually, because I do wonder if there's a big crossover between like people who build stuff at hackathons and no code for the kind of speed of opportunity that it offers. But let's talk a little bit about NetNada actually, because I think that's the most interesting thing here. Like I'd love to hear the story of how you came up with the idea and like what it does as well.
Yeah, I think I touched a bit on that earlier, but the idea came about first as an environmental engineer learning about carbon accounting and what carbon accounting was. Everyone knows the term of a carbon footprint and climate change and global warming, and the act of proceeding with carbon accounting is measuring the amount of tons of carbon dioxide that goes into the atmosphere, right? Or related gases. And it's a very repetitive progress. It's involved a lot of numbers, a lot of repetition in a lot of data management, but it kind of faces itself and opens itself for disruption, which is by leveraging technology, can you replace the human error evolve, and how long does it take? And what we're starting to see is, okay, there's an increase in pressure from consumers, from employees, from governments to be more transparent about their sustainability credentials so they can avoid greenwashing. And how can you remove the consultant from the mix, in a sense, or empower them to deliver their services and their knowledge through technology? Because what we want people to spend time on is implementing solutions, implementing reduction, educating the staff, not going to spreadsheets back and forth and adding up rows and doing categorizations and so forth. So NetNada comes along, plugs into your accounting software, takes your financial data, transforms that into carbon accounts or CO2, and we do that via AI. And what you have at the end is suggestions, certifications, and way on how to reduce your impacts. So suddenly you don't have to be a big business with big budget to get a big consultancy to come and help you. You can have 20 staff, 40 staff, 100 staff, and still be able to deploy a solution at scale without being constrained by how much money you have or how much time you have.
That's really awesome. Yeah, it's proper SaaS stuff, right? You know, it's like something that, you know, people would have paid for that service and, like you said, paid through the nose for it historically, and now they can just get a bit of software that plugs into their accountancy software. I think, is it Xero that you work with?
Yes,
right?
initially we have done Xero, but we're exploring a couple more because, you know, there's a lot of space for disruption and just getting as many data sources as possible.
Awesome. Yeah. Can we see it? Can you give us a look around of it?
Definitely. Well, putting me on the spot, Ollie, but I'll share with the crowd.
Mm-hmm.
Let me just open up. And
maybe while you're opening it, do you want to talk about, like, so I mean, the actual website itself, like there's a kind of a stack involved in terms of the software, the no-code tools that you use to build it. Do you want to tell us a bit about what?
Yeah, definitely. So the website itself, and this is probably one of the first tools I fell in love with, is Webflow. I kind of fell in love with programming a little bit during my university degree, and I came across Webflow, which was basically a website builder on steroids. I didn't want to just use templates. I wanted to move stuff around, but I want to be dealing with CSS and all the hard work of deploying websites. And I had 20 ideas per week. And how can I transform those 20 ideas into something in a couple hours? So the amount of business that I've created on Webflow and then shut down, so I didn't pay the premium version of Webflow at the beginning was so many. So I only had access to 3 websites, and I would keep the website rating and kind of lead that back and forth.
And these were to kind of test out ideas, like
yes, definitely. So all our first this website is built on top of Webflow, and it empowers our marketing team and myself to especially as an early stage company, to adjust your messaging quite quickly, independently, and this connects to your CRMs if needed. It allows you to build automations very affordably, and kind of just don't rely on an agency to come in and change what you want. And on the first instance of what we had was we went from Webflow to Stacker, and now NetNada is built on top of a React Node.js app that we built internally, but we still use all of these low-code tools to test new features and to test different parts of the market and so forth. So the main thing was built on Webflow. Our current website I can share, and then we'll maybe revert back to the low-code environment that we had before. That's okay.
Yeah, please.
You come into your SaaS traditional dashboard, and all you have to do to see value in sustainability is to come down here, press a button. We'll transform all your accounting data into sustainability data, depending on the size of the company, in 60 seconds. That's how fast it can be. And we break that down via AI into different scopes because we match certain categories to certain expenses and so forth. Once we have this breakdown information, we spit out reports that you can use for your proposals, that you can use for internal marketing or external comms. And then we help or ask the consumer if they want to keep on uploading more data, like electricity bills, so we can use consumption data as well if needed. But the differentiator is that we do a complete carbon account mapping with no need for expertise, and that everyone can use. And of course, inside the platform, you have your solutions providers to take initiatives. You can select different partners to action between employees. And you can see how this is going is that the value is not just on the measurements, that's kind of been democratized and everyone will. It's what happens after and how can you provide that value. So it's just a quick look, and it fits companies between anything between 5 employees we're seeing to 100+ staff, because it can either help the owner as an example by himself, or it can help your ESG manager to move things quicker. So it really fits a good range in there.
Very cool. Just seems like it's doing such a good thing and like just kind of so obvious. Like now it's one of the startup ideas when it's like when you hear it, you're like, ah, man, I should have thought of that, you know. But I guess it's when you have the background in sustainability, you know, that you understand what those problems are. You know, it's the kind of domain expertise that allows you to create this stuff.
But what is magical, and I think mentioning just the use of technology in Webflow and Stacker is the amount of people that have ideas, the amount of people that have industry knowledge because they've been working for 4 years, 3 years in a certain sector, and that they want to distribute that at scale, but are limited because they don't have the time to go and learn how to program. And a lot of ideas can be super successful without ever leaving the low-code environments. But having an understanding of how these tools work, maybe remove the barrier of entry on how easy to get started and so forth. I think Stacker is doing amazing things in that. Is really important because I see the world as a cluster of startups and micro businesses, where there's not one big winner, but everyone needs to be empowered to bring that to life.
Yeah, I love that. I truly kind of believe the same thing, and I think no code is a great way to kind of empower all of those micro businesses that, you know, small people who can't code can now build software. And, you know, as no code matures, you know, it's only going to get more and more, you're only going to be able to build more and more complex software with it. And you can have like people building great software for sustainability, or for, you know, for teachers or for nurses, like, and having nurses build software or teachers build software. I think it's a wonderful kind of future that we're looking at there. It'd be cool to hear more about, like, I'd love to hear about the Stacker kind of MVP that you started with. Like, how did you get started with that? Yeah,
I got started because I felt that my core technology is not only going to be, it's not going to be the how it looks, it's the engine behind it. So before I go and build that engine to power all of this, I want to see if the experience works, right? If digitizing as a first step, this process of spreadsheets back and forth is good enough and well received by the industry. So that's why I went there. And I knew that I needed a database, so I went to look for a database, and that was Airtable. And then I know I needed something like a customer portal or a website, and I had to learn the names between, okay, it's a customer portal, it's not just a website. And I put those terms together. And what I've quickly learned, I think Michael Spicer is touching there on the chat, is I think what makes low code the next big thing is that it empowers you to get the basics right and the fundamentals, and then really focus on what's going to make you a differentiator, right? For us, at the beginning was developing the engine behind it. For others, might be the community, or might be the data that you put into your low code, or might be the content that you have and distribute through the low code. So that was the experience. And what made me pick Stacker, in a sense, because there are other options like Bubble and in software and so forth, is that I wanted that sense that it was a modern tool, and it felt like something that was powered by dashboards and you could like update data live. And Stacker had that community or that documentation to walk me through the options. And what's the downside of having so many options is you can create anything in low code, the same thing as you can create anything with code. It is hard for you to perceive what are the limitations of certain tools. And at one point you have to take a risk and go and find out. And that risk might be a week, but if you were to use a developer, that risk might be $30,000 with an agency. So that's the maths that you're doing in your head to begin with.
For sure. I think there's kind of a sort of spectrum with no-code tools or low-code tools of how easy they are to use versus you know, how adaptable they are. And there's kind of at the very, very complex end, you can build things, and there's a lot more functionality that you can build into your app. But I think with all of them, there is eventually going to be a wall that you hit of like, you can't quite do this one thing. Like I remember building my first SaaS app with Bubble, and I thought it could do anything until I found out that it couldn't. I reached that point where I was like, damn it. And I remember I got a response from like the founder in the community being like, no, you can't do that. And I was like, no. I was like, so I think, that is something that you have to really weigh up when you're considering your options here. But you're right. I do think Stacker was the correct option for you to kind of figure out that sort of database dashboard type thing. You can hire an expert off Fiverr if you get stuck here.
And like, you just said on the chat about hiring someone from Fiverr. And I think there's an argument to that, because what no code enables you is to teach a lot of people, right? So suddenly you can get people like yourself, Ollie, to become experts in no code and deliver these services at a way cheaper cost and faster and more scalable and modular ways. So if you do get stuck while building these tools, you have better community, which is maybe more transparent than the traditional like programming community of open source. They're like more willing to kind of reply instantly in a sense, even though that, you have a lot of resources in a traditional programming environment. But it's the fact that you can now extend your services to a Fiverr consultant or a consultant inside, we love code.nocode.tech as an example, one of the biggest hubs of education for low code and no code, and bring them on board in that journey. And that was really, really exciting. And the other major learning that I kind of want to tell the audience in this story is your journey doesn't stop once you try to move out of no code and low code. There's so many things you can build and not having to spend more time or money externally to get them. Your CRM can be built for a lot of companies inside Airtable. You don't need a HubSpot because the functionalities that you're going to use are very, very minimal. You can build your automated marketing inside Airtable. You can build, customer service inside Stacker and so forth. You don't need to do all of your features outside this environment, and also empowering your staff to do stuff that they want. They want to test a new landing page, just go out and build it in Webflow. Don't have to hire someone else. You want to test a different funnel, go and build that automation via Zapier and so forth. So that's really, really interesting.
For sure. I know a company actually here in Edinburgh who has 15-year-old kind of built with code product, and they use no code tools to like rapidly test new features, just like you said, simple landing pages or stuff that connects to the database, just to make it something that they can spin up without needing too much tech resource. And I think that's a really interesting crossover that a lot of more mature companies could be experimenting with.
Yeah, definitely. And also the magic of, we can spend the time, like, we have a very robust database, complex backends, but we can use the database triggers to do automations that don't require any coding. And it's still built on your IP, still built on what you've done with traditional programming, but you enhance that to test those functionalities from your core that you already have.
Exactly. Yeah. And one other thing I should plug is, I think most no-code tools, generally have like an experts page as well. Like, so we have one at Stacker. Like, if you ever need help with your Stacker project, then you can speak to a Stacker expert. It's something I did, a few years ago with a bubble project I was working on, where I paid someone, $150 or something to get help with an API problem I was having, and it was like the best money I ever spent, because it saved me about 4 weeks of learning. They just got me up to speed like that. Shout out to Mariel if you ever watch this. Like, she was awesome. So I think, again, there's the community that you can lean on, but then also these experts and consultants that you can just find someone who will, very, very quickly get you over that hump, so you can continue doing what's important, like all the stuff you were saying, like talking to your customers, like validating the market, all of that good stuff. I realized we've not talked at all about, you've raised investment now, which, I'm like, bravo. That's
now
really
the hard work starts.
Yeah. I was gonna say, now you can rest, put your feet up for a while, right? Those investors aren't expecting anything of you, right? But yeah, I think like it would be really interesting to dwell on that. Like, I think no code is kind of a new thing for many people to wrap their heads around. And let's start with, how did you meet these investors of yours?
Yeah, well, the fundraising process is quite a hard one and a long one. It's about having 100 conversations and 100 no's and 1 yes. But it is the same way that you build a network in community. Is about being out there, having those conversations, shaking hands. What enables a very early stage, and this happened before these investors, but at the beginning, to get conversations going, is having a product or MVP that people can actually log in, authenticate, and use, right? It's not just someone with a pitch deck, it's someone with a pitch deck and an MVP, right? Or not someone with a proposal that I'm going to build this, it's someone with a proposal and something you can log on and use. And so having that taken care of was really easy. But yeah, the traditional, we've invested through raised through Scalata Ventures, a VC fund here in Australia, and they're very supportive. They looked at us and say, okay, this is a very competitive but hot market, and whoever cracks the code on selling to this level of companies is gonna do great things. And building on the no code was that at that time our product was already outside no code, but the fact that we can say, oh, these guys can learn really quickly, they can get market feedback faster than the other ones, I think was a main attractive point.
And yeah, so I'm just wondering if there was like a moment when you were talking to them and you almost had to kind of admit it was no code, like I'm wondering, like, with because it's still, like I said, such a new thing, or at least this version of no code is a new thing. Was there a moment when you were worried about like telling investors, oh, when this is built with no code?
Not really, because like I was saying, I think the moment we went to investors, 80% was outside no code, but that the engine powering it behind was proprietary. But it's the fact that, okay, how were these people able to take on feedback so quickly and iterate and making something that the core value prop? Oh, it's because they use no code and all these tools. And as an investor, you want to have the leanest team possible. If you can do it with 2 people or 1 people, that's awesome, regardless on how they do it, right? And you see the holy grail of that example in raising investment is people who raise tens of millions of dollars with just a pitch deck and a team slide, right? They were the leanest possible. They didn't build anything. They just have the expertise and they go to market strategy. So I understand your question, but I think people are getting well more educated and seeing these tools popping up in their environment and how powerful they are. Everyone is now touching, Airtable to an extent, or filling up an Airtable form to go into a cocktail drink with VCs. So they start seeing these names popping up and they realize how powerful they are. Or everyone sees a type form as an example, or sees made with Webflow. A good example is Notion. People are leaving Notion URL addresses and never paying for the premium Notion website. And you having company wikis and communities being built on top of Notion, leaving the product name in there. And they know it's a low-code tool and they know it works.
Yeah, for sure. No, I think that's I think that there's perhaps more education to be done around that, but I think it's also, as you said, like, the investors, good investors are investing in you as a person. They understand that you can move the needle and that tools like this allow you to move quickly, and focus on the important stuff, like, talking to customers at this stage, at this stage is like finding out more about the problem. That's awesome.
And put it this way, if an opportunity comes our way and we're able to seize it in 3 days because we had the capability to attach different features easily, that's a win, right? And then you can win a proposal and then go out and build it. But being able to show and demo and so forth is powerful regardless of where you are in the journey. Yeah,
for sure. And I do think, there are parts of the world, or companies where it is successful. Like, I think, do you know Dividend Finance? So
yes.
I think that's perhaps the outlier at this point. I think there's a long tail after them, but they raised $350 million, after starting with Bubble, and they're climate tech of sorts, right? They do solar panel grants, So I think, again, that domain expertise, they understand the problem. They had years of building of that stuff, and then they said, we can build a thing that kind of automates and streamlines this process, and I think that's great. So we've only got a few minutes left. I'd love to ask you, and maybe this is like the founder in me, like wondering, like, do you see like other opportunities for like climate tech no code startups right now, like things that people could be doing?
Definitely. So climate tech is very broad. We do carbon accounting and sustainability, and in the future ESG inside sustainability, but you have education, you have circular economy, you have carbon capture and so forth. I think one of the biggest things that we're seeing is, and we also saw that with no code, is the power of education and extending those services through education. And I think a lot of what's going to happen in the climate sustainability is because tools are getting more democratized. The value add is who has the most knowledge to then implement those, and having the tools to implement that internally, whatever solution you pick. So I think, you know, the fact of education, customer portal, activation, internal tools, and project tracking could be built on top of low code for sure. The other one is transparency in the sustainability space. As people like buy offsets and want certifications and so forth, being able to map those, to be able to access information, to be able to communicate with those decision makers, doesn't have to be super complex. You just need a hub that can scale and that you can put information in and so forth.
Can already imagine how you'd build it in Stacker. Yeah, for sure. No, I think that's just it. A lot of this stuff, you know, is displaying information to the right stakeholders at the right time in the right format. And, you know, I think once you understand like how a sort of database type thing works, like Airtable, and then a way to display that information, you know, something like Stacker, then you can create something quite powerful that, you know, is basically a fully fledged product, you know. So yeah. I guess I don't have a super clever last question. Although something I always think about is like, do you think in the next sort of 10 years, like, do you think we're going to be thinking in terms of no code at all? Or do you think it's just going to be like software engineering? Do you think we're going to drop the idea of no code and code and it's just going to all become one thing? Or do you think they're going to remain kind of separate things for forever?
This is like actually a quote from one of my investors, Tom Smalley, and he calls it the great bundling and unbundling. Every industry goes through a bundling exercise and an unbundling. And I think today, like, we might see in the future that the no code, I think to them might be like in a bundling scenario where like everything, you can have a stacker that does everything in a sense. I think we might go into a unbundling where you don't think about no code or programming, you think about tools. So it's like, which tool gets me faster to what I want to be? And I think that's like the path forward. And who builds those tools? Yes, there might be software engineers, or you might put different tools together to produce that holy grail of tool that your company needs. I think it's also important to understand that there is tech debt created by using low-code tools. You have people internally that have to manage security, that maintain legacy processes and apps and so forth. And I think that might happen with or without no code regardless.
For sure. No, I love that way of thinking about it, the bundling and unbundling of code and no code. That's awesome. Well, listen, we're out of time. I want to say thank you so much for taking the time to chat today. To everyone who joined, thank you. If you're watching this afterwards on like the recording on YouTube, then you can reach out to us with any questions. And yeah, if you want to connect with me and Afonso on LinkedIn, Afonso, are you happy if I kind of send your LinkedIn out in a follow-up email as well? Yeah, they'll be fine. Great. Okay. Well, I kind of want to go and do a climate tech startup now. Thank you so much again. And yeah, thanks everyone for coming. Thank you. Cheers. Bye.